What happens when the most feared predators in the galaxy suddenly become the hunted? For 3,000 years, the Draconian Empire has swept across star systems like a plague of steel and fire. Entire civilizations have fallen to their unstoppable armadas. Planets have been reduced to ash. Species have been wiped from existence with cold efficiency. But something unprecedented happened when their massive fleet arrived at a small blue world called Earth. Something that has never occurred in their long history of conquest. They stopped. They hesitated. They retreated. Now, as news of this impossible event spreads across the galaxy, every species that has cowered in fear of the Draconians is asking the same question. What could possibly make the galaxy's apex predators afraid? The answer lies not in superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but in something far more dangerous: the indomitable spirit of humanity and the terrifying lengths they will go to protect what they love. What the Draconians discovered above Earth that day would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy forever and turn the hunters into the hunted. This is the story of how humanity's greatest weakness became their ultimate weapon, and why the entire galaxy now trembles at the mention of one word: Earth. Admiral stood on the command deck of his massive form casting long shadows across the control stations. His scaled hide bore the scars of 1,000 battles, each mark a testament to his rise through the Draconian military hierarchy. The bridge hummed with quiet efficiency as his crew prepared for what should have been another routine planetary conquest. Through the massive viewport, Earth hung before them like a blue-green jewel suspended in the cosmic void. The third planet from its star appeared unremarkable compared to the dozens of worlds the Draconian Empire had claimed in recent cycles. No unusual energy signatures, no massive defensive installations visible from orbit, no signs of the advanced technology that had occasionally given them pause during previous conquests. "Status report," commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. Lieutenant Orr, his communications officer, turned from her station. "Long-range scans complete, Admiral. The planet shows signs of industrial civilization, but their technology appears primitive. No evidence of faster-than-light capability. Their largest vessels barely reach their planet's natural satellite." The Admiral's lips curled in what might have been amusement among his species. Another primitive world ripe for harvest. The Draconian Empire had built its vast domain on the systematic conquest of such civilizations. It was almost disappointing how easy these campaigns had become. "Population centers," he inquired. "Scattered across multiple continents, approximately 8 billion inhabitants. They appear to have developed along typical technological progression lines, though there are some interesting anomalies in their social structure." His interest sharpened slightly. Anomalies could sometimes mean hidden dangers, though in 3 of Conquest, truly dangerous surprises had become increasingly rare. "Elaborate," or consulted her. Unlike most species at this development stage, they lack global unity. Multiple independent nation-states, many in active conflict with one another. Their military forces are divided and often oppose each other rather than focusing on external threats. This drew a rumbling laugh from several bridge officers. A divided world would fall even more easily than usual. The Draconian strategy of gradual intimidation followed by overwhelming force had never failed against a fragmented species. Weapons capabilities: crude kinetic projectiles, chemical explosives, and primitive fusion devices. Their most advanced weapons could theoretically pose a threat to individual soldiers, but nothing that could challenge our shields or armor. We detect no energy weapons, no plasma technology, no particle beams. Admiral nodded with satisfaction. The conquest would proceed according to standard protocol, a show of force to demonstrate their superiority, followed by ultimatum demands for surrender. Most species capitulated immediately upon seeing the true scale of a Draconian battle fleet. Those foolish enough to resist rarely lasted more than a planetary rotation. "Begin Phase 1 deployment," he ordered. "I want the humans to see exactly what they're dealing with before we make our demands." It was a masterpiece of Draconian engineering, stretching nearly 15 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull bristled with weapons capable of reducing continents to molten slag, and its hangar bays held enough fighter craft to blot out a planet's sun. But it was merely the flagship of an armada that had grown to legendary proportions through centuries of successful campaigns. As orders rippled through the fleet, hundreds of warships began to move into formation. Dreadnoughts capable of cracking moons took position alongside carrier vessels that disgorged clouds of smaller attack craft. Support ships loaded with troops and occupation equipment spread out in textbook battle formation, their movement as coordinated as a predator's strike. The humans would look up at their skis and despair. They would see the futility of resistance written across the heavens in the hulls of warships that had conquered 100 worlds. Fear would paralyze their scattered governments, and they would beg for the mercy that the Draconian Empire sometimes granted to particularly compliant species. Or so Admiral believed. The first sign that this conquest might differ from the others came from an unexpected source. Chief Navigator, a veteran officer whose spatial awareness had guided the fleet through countless campaigns, approached the Admiral's command station with an expression of puzzlement. "Admiral, I'm detecting unusual readings from the planet's communication networks." "Define unusual." "The level of coordination is unexpected. Despite their apparent political divisions, their information distribution systems are connecting almost instantly across their entire world. Population centers that should be isolated from each other are sharing data in real time." His eyes narrowed. "Military coordination." "No, sir, that's what makes it strange. Their military communications remain fragmented, exactly as we'd expect from a divided species. But their civilian networks are carrying unprecedented traffic volumes. Images of our fleet are already being distributed to every population center on the planet." This was mildly interesting, but hardly concerning. Most species reacted to the sight of a draconian fleet with panic, and panic often led to better communication as desperate leaders tried to coordinate a response. It was a natural reaction that typically worked in the Empire's favor by spreading fear more efficiently than any weapon. "Are their governments attempting to unify their forces?" "That's the peculiar part, Admiral. There's minimal military coordination, but civilian activity has increased exponentially. It's as if their entire population has simultaneously decided to pay attention to something." Before could respond, his tactical officer called out from across the bridge. "Admiral, we're detecting launches from the planet's surface." The command staff tensed momentarily. Desperate species sometimes attempted futile attacks when faced with overwhelming force. Such gestures were typically suicidal, but occasionally required the fleet to respond with more force than initially planned. "Weapons signatures?" "None, sir. These appear to be information packages, electromagnetic transmissions directed at various points in their solar system and beyond. The power levels suggest they're trying to send messages to other star systems." His confidence returned. Of course, the humans were crying for help. Many species attempted to send distress calls when faced with conquest, though none had ever received aid. The galaxy had learned long ago that interference with draconian expansion was a fatal mistake. "Let them send their messages," he decided. "When their potential allies receive word of our presence, it will only reinforce the futility of resistance. Fear spreads faster than any ship." What Admiral didn't realize was that the electromagnetic bursts leaving Earth's atmosphere weren't distress calls. They were something far more dangerous to his Empire's future: documentation. The humans weren't begging for rescue. They were creating a record. Every image of the Draconian fleet, every detail of their weapons and formation, every tactical observation their primitive but surprisingly sophisticated sensor networks could gather was being transmitted outward at light speed. The species that would eventually receive these transmissions wouldn't learn that Earth had fallen to the Draconian Empire. They would learn something that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization, that Earth had discovered how to fight back. But that knowledge lay in the future. For now, Admiral proceeded with absolute confidence in the outcome. He had conquered civilizations far more advanced than these primitive humans. Their scattered governments would surrender within hours of seeing his fleet's true capabilities. "Open a communication channel to all population centers," he commanded. "It's time to offer them the choice that all species receive." The message that went out from followed the template that had succeeded on countless worlds. A demonstration of overwhelming superiority, an offer of survival for those who submitted immediately, and a promise of extinction for those foolish enough to resist. It was delivered in the humans' primary languages, translated by linguistic protocols that had been refined through centuries of first contact situations. But as the Admiral watched the planet's response, he began to notice the first cracks in his certainty. The humans didn't react as other species had. There was no immediate surge of surrender communications from their governments, no desperate attempts at negotiation, no offers of tribute or submission. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The civilian communication networks that Chief Navigator had noted earlier suddenly erupted with activity that dwarfed anything the Draconians had observed before. But rather than the panic they expected, the transmissions carried something else entirely. Analysis algorithms designed to interpret alien responses began feeding data to the bridge crew, and what they found every pattern the Draconian Empire had established through of conquest. The humans were sharing information, not just about the fleet overhead, but about the Draconians themselves. Somehow, incredibly, they already possessed detailed intelligence about the Empire's expansion patterns, military capabilities, and conquest methodologies. Files that should have been impossible for a pre-civilization to obtain were appearing on communication networks across the planet. How, whispered or staring at her display in disbelief. How do they know about the siege of Andromache that was classified even within our own fleet? Admiral felt the first stirrings of an emotion he had rarely experienced: uncertainty. The conquest of Earth was beginning to feel less like a routine operation and more like walking into a trap that he couldn't yet understand. And in the depths of space, those electromagnetic transmissions continued streaming outward, carrying with them the seeds of a revolution that would transform the Draconian Empire from predator to prey. The revelation that humanity possessed detailed intelligence about Draconian operations sent ripples of confusion through this command structure. Admiral found himself facing a situation that challenged every assumption his species had made about primitive civilizations. Tactical analysis, he demanded, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there moments before. Senior Tactical Officer N, a veteran whose strategic mind had guided the Empire through some of its most challenging conquests, stepped forward with his preliminary assessment. Admiral, the humans are demonstrating knowledge that should be impossible for their technological level. They possess detailed schematics of our standard battle formations, accurate assessments of our weapons capabilities, and what appears to be a complete database of our historical conquest patterns. The implications were staggering. Such information could only have come from within the Empire itself, but the idea of Draconian traitors was almost unthinkable. Loyalty was bred into their species through of military culture and genetic conditioning. Could this be the work of another galactic power? Asked. Perhaps someone seeking to use these humans as proxies against us. And shook his head. The information appears to have been gathered over an extended period through systematic observation and analysis. It's not intelligence that was simply handed to them. They compiled it themselves through methods we don't yet understand. Across the bridge, stations continued reporting increasingly disturbing developments. The human communication networks weren't just sharing information about the immediate threat. They were coordinating responses with a sophistication that seemed impossible for a species that couldn't even achieve global political unity. "Sir," called out the monitoring station operator, "I'm detecting massive industrial mobilization across all major population centers. Manufacturing facilities are switching to wartime production protocols with efficiency levels that exceed our projections for their technological base." This drew Admiral's full attention. Industrial mobilization required months of preparation for most species, even those with unified command structures. The humans were achieving it in hours despite their apparent political fragmentation. "What are they producing?" "That's difficult to determine, sir. The electromagnetic signatures suggest they're manufacturing something, but the patterns don't match any known weapons technology. However, the scale is unprecedented. It appears that their entire civilization is shifting into production mode simultaneously." The Admiral moved to the primary display screen, watching the tactical overlay of Earth's surface. Thermal imaging showed thousands of facilities across multiple continents suddenly blazing with activity. Transportation networks that had carried civilian traffic moments before were now moving materials and personnel with military precision. It was as if an invisible switch had been thrown, transforming a divided world into a unified war machine. But what truly troubled him was the humans' apparent lack of fear. Standard psychological profiles suggested that pre-civilizations should be paralyzed by terror when confronted with the reality of galactic predators. Instead, the monitoring stations reported a phenomenon that Draconian had never documented. The humans seemed to be getting more organized and more determined as their understanding of the threat increased. Admiral, Chief Navigator reported, "I'm tracking unusual movement patterns in their orbital infrastructure. They have primitive space stations and satellite networks that should be defensively irrelevant, but they're repositioning assets in configurations that suggest tactical awareness." Explain. Their communications satellites are moving into positions that would optimize information flow during a planetary siege. Their space-based manufacturing platforms are being repositioned to areas that would be difficult for us to target without causing extensive collateral damage to their planetary infrastructure. It's as if they understand our standard siege protocols and are actively countering them. The pieces of the puzzle were forming a picture that Admiral didn't want to acknowledge. The humans weren't just aware of Draconian capabilities. They had been preparing for this encounter. But how long had they been preparing? And more importantly, who had been teaching them? His contemplation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the fleet's intelligence division. Commander Ara, the Empire's specialist in alien psychology and behavior analysis, appeared on his personal communication screen with an expression of barely controlled alarm. "Admiral, we have a significant problem." "Report." "Our standard psychological warfare protocols are having the opposite of their intended effect. Instead of inducing surrender, the display of our military superiority appears to be triggering some form of collective response that's making the humans more dangerous, not less." This was unprecedented. Psychological warfare had been refined over thousands of conquests into a precise science. The sight of an overwhelming Draconian fleet should have broken the will of any rational species. "Are you suggesting they're irrational?" "No, sir, that's what makes this so concerning. They're extremely rational, but their rationality is operating according to principles we haven't encountered before. Most species calculate the odds of survival and surrender when faced with impossible circumstances. The humans are calculating the odds of survival and then figuring out how to change those odds." Admiral felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature on his bridge. "Elaborate." "They're not thinking like prey, Admiral. They're thinking like predators who have been cornered, and cornered predators are infinitely more dangerous than prey that knows it's beaten." Before the Admiral could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the command center. Emergency lights bathed the bridge in harsh red illumination as tactical stations erupted with urgent reports. "Admiral," and called out, "we're detecting massive energy signatures from the planet's surface. Multiple locations are showing power buildups that exceed anything in our projections for their technological capabilities." "Weapons?" "Unknown, sir. The energy patterns don't match any known weapons technology, but the power levels suggest something significant is about to happen." Move to the tactical display, studying the readouts with growing concern. Dozens of locations across Earth's surface were showing energy buildups that seemed impossible for a primitive civilization. But the pattern of their placement suggested strategic coordination at a level that should have required decades of planning. "Sir," called the communications officer, "we're receiving a transmission from the planet. It's being broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously, and it's reaching every ship in our fleet." On screen, the main display flickered and resolved into an image that would haunt Admiral for the rest of his career. A single human sat in what appeared to be a simple room, facing the camera with an expression of calm determination. But behind him, visible through a window, stretched a cityscape that pulsed with activity as millions of beings prepared for war. When the human spoke, it was in flawless Draconian, using idioms and inflections that suggested intimate knowledge of their culture and psychology. "Greetings, Admiral of the. We know who you are, where you come from, and what you've done to the 17 civilizations you conquered before arriving here. We know about the Siege of Prime, where you reduced a planet of 12 billion beings to ash. We know about the Andromache system, where you broke the will of 3 species simultaneously. We know about Theta, where you pioneered the psychological techniques you're attempting to use against us." The bridge fell silent. The human's knowledge was impossible, yet he was reciting classified information with casual accuracy. We also know that in 3,000 years of expansion, your empire has never encountered effective resistance from a pre-civilization. Today, that changes. The human paused, and for a moment something flickered in his eyes that Admiral recognized with visceral shock. It was the same look he had seen in the mirror countless times before battle, the expression of a predator calculating the weaknesses of its prey. You see, Admiral, you've made one critical error in your assessment of our species. You've assumed that being divided makes us weak. You've assumed that lacking faster-than-light travel makes us helpless. You've assumed that our primitive technology makes us easy prey. The energy signatures from Earth's surface continued building. Whatever the humans were preparing, it was unlike anything in Draconian experience. What you fail to understand is that humanity's greatest strength has never been our technology or our unity. Our greatest strength is our absolutely stubborn refusal to accept that anything is impossible. And we've spent the last 50 years learning everything we could about your empire, preparing for the day you would arrive. 50 years, the number hit Admiral like a physical blow. That meant the humans had been watching, learning, and preparing since before his own assignment to Frontier Command. But how? The question you should be asking yourself, Admiral, is not whether you can conquer us. The question is whether you can afford what it will cost you to try. Because we're not going to surrender, we're not going to flee, and we're not going to make this easy for you. We're going to fight with every weapon we can build, every strategy we can devise, and every dirty trick we can imagine. And when we're done, your empire will know that there are worse things in this galaxy than being conquered. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Admiral stared at the screen for long moments, processing implications that stretched far beyond a single planetary conquest. "Sir," and said quietly, "what are your orders?" For the first time in his career, Admiral hesitated. The humans had just declared war not just against his fleet, but against the fundamental assumptions that had guided Draconian expansion for. They were claiming that being primitive and divided actually made them more dangerous, not less. And the terrifying thing was, he was beginning to believe them. The silence following the human transmission stretched across this bridge like a held breath. Admiral stood motionless, his mind racing through tactical calculations that no longer seemed to follow familiar patterns. In 3 of Conquest, no species had ever spoken to the Draconian Empire with such casual confidence about their own inevitable victory. "Analysis teams, full spectrum assessment," he finally commanded, his voice carefully controlled. "I want to know what we're really dealing with." The next hour brought revelations that shattered every assumption the Draconians had made about Earth and its inhabitants. Deep scanning revealed that the humans hadn't simply been preparing for their arrival. They had been preparing specifically for them. The energy buildups across the planet weren't random industrial activity, but coordinated construction projects that seemed designed to counter specific Draconian tactical advantages. "Sir," reported Chief Science Officer Ara, her usual composure strained, "we've identified what they're building. It's unprecedented." Admiral turned from the tactical display, where he had been studying the impossible logistics of human mobilization. "Report. They're constructing what appears to be a planetary defense grid, but not using any technology we recognize. Instead of energy shields or kinetic barriers, they're building something that looks like a massive interconnected network of communication relays. Communication relays can't stop plasma bombardment. No, sir, but they can do something potentially more dangerous. Based on the power requirements and network topology, it appears they're building a system that could coordinate defensive actions across their entire planet with response times measured in microseconds. Every human settlement, every military installation, every industrial center would essentially function as a single, unified organism. The implications sent a chill through the Admiral's scaled hide. Draconian tactics relied heavily on the principle of divide and conquer, isolating planetary regions and defeating them sequentially. If the humans could truly coordinate planetary defense in real time, they would be facing something that had never existed in known space, a single defensive entity with the resources of an entire world. But that was only the beginning of the disturbing intelligence reports. "Admiral," called out Lieutenant from the communications station, "we're intercepting massive data transfers between the human networks and something else." "Elaborate." "Sir, they're not just coordinating with each other. They're exchanging information with sources outside their solar system. The transmission patterns suggest they're in contact with elements throughout this entire sector of space. Admiral felt the deck seem to shift beneath his feet. Impossible. They lack faster-than-light communication. Yes, sir, but they don't need it. They're using their primitive electromagnetic transmissions, but they've been maintaining these communications for decades. Whatever they're coordinating with has been in position, waiting for our arrival. The pieces of an impossible puzzle began forming in the Admiral's mind. The humans hadn't been preparing to defend themselves against a theoretical future threat. They had been preparing to spring a trap that encompassed star systems. Tactical, I want full spectrum scans of this entire sector. If there are assets out there that we haven't detected, I need to know about them immediately. And bent over his instruments, fingers dancing across controls with practiced efficiency. What he found everything the Draconians thought they knew about this region of space. Admiral, we have a problem, a very serious problem. Report. I'm detecting artificial structures in 17 different star systems within a 50-light-year radius. Structures that were hidden from our advanced scouts by some form of stealth technology that I can't identify. But now that the humans have activated whatever network they've built, these structures are beginning to power up. The bridge fell silent except for the humming of instruments, and the soft sound of scaled skin shifting against uniform fabric as the crew absorbed this revelation. What kind of structures? Unknown, sir. They don't match any technology in our databases, but the power signatures are significant, and they appear to be moving. Admiral moved to an station, studying the displays that showed a tactical situation unlike anything in Draconian military history. The humans hadn't just been preparing to defend their own world. They had somehow constructed a network of installations across dozens of star systems, all apparently designed to activate simultaneously when the Draconian fleet arrived at Earth. Time to full activation of unknown installations. At current power-up rates, approximately 6 hours, sir. And their purpose? Unknown, but Admiral. Anne's voice carried a note of something that might have been fear. The energy signatures are increasing exponentially. Whatever these installations are designed to do, they're going to have the power to do it on a massive scale. Before Admiral could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Emergency protocols engaged automatically as threat detection systems identified something approaching the fleet that shouldn't have been possible. Contact bearing 27 Mark 8, called the sensor operator. Object approaching at significant sublight velocity. Weapons free, the Admiral commanded immediately. Identify and engage. Sir, it's not showing up on targeting scanners. I have a visual contact, but no sensor lock. On screen, the main display filled with an image that would later become legendary throughout Draconian space. Approaching the massive fleet was a single small craft that appeared to be built from salvaged components and held together with what looked like metallic tape. It bore no weapons that sensors could detect, carried no shields that registered on any scanner, and showed no energy signature that suggested advanced technology. It was, by any rational assessment, a piece of space junk that posed no threat to a fleet capable of sterilizing planets. Admiral, and reported with growing alarm, that craft is broadcasting a signal that's being picked up by every installation in this sector. Whatever it's transmitting, it's causing coordinated responses across dozens of star systems. Admiral watched the approaching craft with growing unease. It was too simple, too obvious, too deliberately non-threatening. After the revelations of the past hours, anything the humans did that appeared harmless was automatically suspect. Hail the craft. Channel open, sir. Unknown vessel, you are approaching a Draconian Imperial fleet engaged in lawful conquest operations. State your intentions or be destroyed. The response came immediately, and the voice was unmistakably human. But unlike the earlier transmission from Earth, this one carried an undertone of barely controlled amusement. Draconian vessel, this is Captain Sarah of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. I'm here to offer you one last chance to withdraw from this system before we demonstrate why that would be in your best interests. Diplomatic Corps. The humans were sending a diplomat to face a battle fleet. It was either breathtaking arrogance or supreme confidence, and Admiral was beginning to suspect it was the latter. You are in no position to make demands human. Admiral, with respect, I think you misunderstand the situation. You've brought a fleet designed to conquer a primitive planet. What you've actually encountered is a civilization that has spent half a century preparing for this exact scenario. We know your capabilities, your tactics, your strengths, and your weaknesses. We know them because we've been studying every conquest you've made, every battle you've fought, and every mistake you've ever made. The craft continued its approach, and Admiral realized with growing alarm that his gunners couldn't target it. Every time weapons systems locked onto the small vessel, the targeting solutions dissolved as if the craft wasn't actually where sensors said it was. More importantly, Captain continued, we know something about your empire that you've apparently forgotten. The Draconian expansion stopped 600 years ago not because you ran out of targets, but because you encountered something that made you pause. Something that convinced your leadership that there were limits to how far you should push. Admiral felt his blood chill. The reference was to classified historical records that should have been impossible for humans to access. We know about the silence, Admiral. We know about the species that fought you to a standstill and then simply disappeared. We know that your empire has been looking over its shoulder ever since, wondering when they might return. The silence, a name that even veteran Draconian officers spoke in whispers. The one campaign that had ended not in conquest but in strategic withdrawal, against an enemy that had vanished before the true scale of their capabilities could be understood. What we're offering you, Admiral, is the chance to leave this system with your fleet intact and your reputation unblemished. You can report to your superiors that Earth was found to be under the protection of forces that made conquest inadvisable. They'll understand. They've made that decision before. And if we refuse, then you'll discover that the silence didn't disappear, Admiral. They've been here all along, learning, growing, and preparing, and they've been teaching us. The small craft had somehow approached to within a few thousand kilometers of the without being successfully targeted once. As Admiral watched, similar craft began appearing around other ships in his fleet, each one broadcasting the same signature that made mockery of Draconian fire control systems. You have 1 hour to consider our offer, Admiral. After that, we'll show you what 50 years of preparation can accomplish when necessity is the teacher and survival is the motivation. The transmission ended, leaving Admiral staring at a tactical display that showed his mighty fleet surrounded by craft that his sensors could barely detect and his weapons couldn't target. For the first time in his career, he was beginning to understand how prey felt when they realized the hunt was not going as expected. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The hour that Captain had given Admiral passed with agonizing slowness. During that time, the Draconian fleet's sophisticated sensor arrays detected phenomena that challenged every principle of military science they had mastered over 3 of conquest. The small craft surrounding his fleet weren't just. They were somehow existing in states of quantum uncertainty that made traditional weapons useless. Draconian plasma cannons, designed to slag continents, couldn't achieve weapons lock on targets that seemed to occupy multiple positions simultaneously. It was as if the humans had somehow weaponized probability itself. "Status report," Admiral commanded, though he dreaded what he might hear. Commander N, his tactical officer, looked up from displays that showed readings his instruments had never been designed to interpret. "Admiral, our weapons systems are reporting successful target acquisition, followed immediately by target disappearance. The enemy craft appear to be using some form of quantum displacement technology that allows them to exist in superposition states until the moment of weapons impact." Meaning they're everywhere and nowhere until we try to shoot them, at which point they're definitely somewhere else. The Admiral had devoted his entire career to understanding the art of warfare, but this was beyond anything in Draconian military doctrine. What about our own defensive systems? Functional, but, Admiral, I'm not certain they're relevant. These craft aren't showing weapons signatures, but the scanning patterns they're using suggest they're mapping our ship's internal structures with resolution down to the molecular level. They know where every critical system is located, how every component functions, and apparently how to disable things without actually damaging them. As if summoned by N's words, Chief Engineering Officer's voice crackled over the communications system with barely controlled panic. "Admiral, we have massive system anomalies developing across the ship. Our computers are reporting diagnostic errors in systems that are functioning perfectly. Our environmental controls are running optimization routines that we never programmed. And our weapons charging sequences are somehow running backwards while still building power. Admiral felt reality slipping away from his understanding. Explain. Sir, it's as if someone has gained administrative access to our most secure systems and is rewriting our operational parameters in real time. But there's no physical intrusion, no data breaches we can detect, and no communication pathways that could support this level of access. Are we under attack? Sir, I don't think they're attacking us. I think they're optimizing us. Our systems are running more efficiently than they ever have. Our power distribution is more stable, our computational processes are faster, and our life support systems are operating at theoretical maximum efficiency. The implications sent chills through the Admiral's scaled hide. The humans weren't trying to disable his fleet. They were demonstrating that they could control it completely while simultaneously making it function better than ever before. It was a display of capability that transcended warfare and entered the realm of technological dominance so complete that resistance became meaningless. Admiral, Lieutenant, or called from the communications station. Incoming transmission from Earth. Same source as the previous diplomatic contact. On screen, Captain's image appeared again, but this time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a figure that made Admiral's blood freeze in his veins. Tall, ethereal, with the distinctive features of a species that had haunted draconian nightmares for 6 centuries, stood one of the Silents. Admiral, Captain began, I'd like you to meet Ambassador of the Eternal Collective. I believe your people have met before. The figure behind stepped forward, and when it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in the mind rather than through the ears. Admiral, your empire knows our reputation for avoiding unnecessary conflict. 600 years ago, we from direct engagement not because we could not destroy your forces, but because destruction serves no purpose when understanding can be achieved instead. Admiral found his voice with difficulty. You were presumed extinct. Death is a concept with limited relevance to our kind. We to observe, to learn, and to prepare for the eventual moment when your expansion would require adjustment. The humans have proven to be remarkably gifted students. When we first detected their civilization 50 years ago, we found a species that shared our interest in learning, adaptation, and the practical application of knowledge. We offered to share certain insights in exchange for their assistance in a long-term project. Ambassador gestured, and the displays on this bridge suddenly filled with images that comprehension. Massive structures in deep space, installations that spanned solar systems, and technologies that made draconian engineering look primitive by comparison. The project was simple in concept, Admiral. Your empire has brought order to much of this galaxy through conquest and subjugation, but order achieved through fear is inherently unstable. We have spent these 6 centuries developing an alternative approach. Captain stepped forward again. What the ambassador is explaining, Admiral, is that you haven't encountered a primitive civilization protected by advanced allies. You've encountered the first graduate of a new kind of academy, one that teaches entire species how to transcend their limitations through cooperation rather than conquest. The installations your sensors have detected throughout this sector are not weapons, Admiral. They are schools. Each one is designed to accelerate the development of species that show potential for transcending their current evolutionary limitations. Humanity was our first complete success. Admiral stared at the displays showing technologies beyond his comprehension. What do you want from us? Nothing that you are not ready to give freely. Your empire has reached the limits of expansion through conquest. Your military excellence cannot solve the fundamental problem that conquest creates. Eventually, you run out of civilizations willing to be conquered, and you face the choice between stagnation and evolution. Ambassador stepped closer to the camera, and his next words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Today marks the beginning of that choice for your people. You can continue attempting to expand through military force, and you will discover that every species you encounter from this point forward has been prepared to resist you in ways that make victory Pyrrhic at best. Or you can choose to learn what we have been teaching the humans, how to grow beyond the limitations that have defined your species for, how to achieve expansion through transcendence rather than conquest. Captain added, The choice is entirely yours, Admiral, but the age of easy conquests is over. Every species in this galaxy now knows that resistance is possible, and many of them are learning how to make resistance inevitable. Admiral felt the weight of cosmic change settling around him. And if we choose to continue as we have, then you will find that the galaxy has become a very different place than the one your empire has dominated for so long. You will discover that your reputation for invincibility was built on fighting species that had never been taught to fight back effectively. That reputation will not survive contact with species that have learned from our combined experiences. The transmission continued for another hour, during which Admiral received a comprehensive education in how fundamentally the balance of galactic power had shifted. The humans and their teachers had not simply prepared to defend Earth. They had prepared to transform the nature of interstellar conflict itself. When the communication finally ended, Admiral stood in silence on his bridge, contemplating a future that looked nothing like the past his empire had dominated for 3,000 years. "Sir," and said quietly, "your orders." Admiral studied the tactical displays that showed his fleet surrounded by representatives of a civilization that had just redefined what was possible. For the first time in his career, he was facing a situation where military excellence was irrelevant because the conflict had transcended the realm where military solutions could apply. "Prepare a transmission to Imperial Command," he said finally. "Inform them that Earth has been determined to be under the protection of forces that make conquest inadvisable, and that strategic withdrawal is recommended." "Sir, what should we tell them about the nature of these forces?" Admiral considered the question that would haunt Draconian leadership for generations to come. "Tell them that the galaxy has learned to evolve faster than we learned to conquer it, and that we have a choice to make about what kind of civilization we want to be going forward." As the began its withdrawal from Earth orbit, Admiral realized that he was not retreating from a battle. He was retreating from an examination that his species had failed without even understanding what was being tested. The age of draconian expansion was over. The age of something entirely new had begun. 3 months after the retreat from Earth, the reverberations of that encounter had transformed the political landscape of the galaxy. Admiral stood in the Imperial Council chambers on Draconis Prime, facing an assembly of his superiors who were struggling to comprehend a reality that three of successful expansion. High Admiral, Supreme Commander of the Draconian Imperial Fleet, studied the classified reports with an expression that mixed disbelief with growing alarm. Around the circular chamber, other senior military leaders and Imperial administrators showed similar signs of cognitive dissonance as they processed information that challenged every assumption upon which their empire had been built. "Explain to me again," High Admiral commanded, "how a primitive civilization without faster-than-light capability managed to coordinate defensive measures across 17 star systems." Admiral had spent the 3 months since Earth preparing for this moment, but the explanation still sounded impossible even to him. "They didn't coordinate the defenses, High Admiral. The defenses were already in place, waiting for our arrival. The humans were never the primary threat. They were the bait." "Bait for what?" "For us, sir. The Silence, the Eternal Collective, has spent 6 centuries studying our expansion patterns, our military doctrine, and our operational psychology. They used that knowledge to identify the optimal location and circumstances for demonstrating that our expansion model had reached its limits." Around the chamber, scaled faces showed expressions ranging from incredulity to barely contained rage. The idea that their mighty empire had been manipulated into a carefully prepared trap was almost unthinkable. "The installations we detected," Admiral continued, "weren't defensive structures. They were educational facilities. Each one has been teaching entire civilizations how to resist us effectively. Not just the technology to fight back, but the psychological and social frameworks necessary to maintain resistance against overwhelming force." High Admiral leaned forward in his command chair. "Are you suggesting that our expansion has been deliberately limited by an enemy that could have destroyed us at any time?" "Not destroyed, sir. Redirected. The Eternal Collective doesn't seem interested in conquest or destruction. They appear to be engineering the evolution of galactic civilization toward something beyond our current understanding." "And what evidence do you have for these extraordinary claims?" Admiral activated the holographic display system, filling the center of the chamber with tactical readouts that had been analyzed by the Empire's finest strategic minds. Over the past 3 months, we've attempted to resume expansion operations in 14 different sectors. In every case, we've encountered resistance that demonstrates knowledge of our capabilities, tactics, and weaknesses that should have been impossible for the civilizations involved to possess. The holographic display showed battle reports from across the galaxy. Species that should have fallen easily to Draconian might were employing defensive strategies that turned the Empire's own strengths against them. Psychological warfare techniques that had worked for were being countered by populations that seemed immune to fear. Military formations that had dominated countless battlefields were being anticipated and neutralized by enemies that fought with impossible coordination. The pattern is consistent across all encounters, Admiral explained. These civilizations aren't just fighting us, they're teaching us. Every engagement has been designed to demonstrate that our traditional approaches are no longer viable while minimizing casualties on both sides. High Admiral studied the data with growing unease. What are our casualty rates in these engagements? Remarkably low, sir. In most cases, our forces have been defeated through technological sabotage, communication disruption, and tactical misdirection rather than direct combat. It's as if our enemies are more interested in proving their point than in destroying our fleets. That makes no sense from a military perspective. No, sir, it doesn't. But it makes perfect sense from an educational perspective. We're not being attacked by civilizations that want to destroy us. We're being taught by civilizations that want us to evolve. The chamber fell silent as the implications of this assessment settled over the assembled leadership. For an empire built on military conquest, the idea of being forced to evolve by entities that could defeat them without effort was profoundly disturbing. "What about retaliation?" asked Fleet Admiral, commander of the 3rd Expansion Group. "If we concentrated our full military might against these teachers, could we break their network?" Admiral had anticipated this question, though the answer was one that no one wanted to hear. Our strategic analysis suggests that attempting large-scale retaliation would result in the complete neutralization of our fleet without significant damage to their installations. The technological disparity is too great for military solutions to be viable. Then what do you recommend? This was the moment Admiral had been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. "High Admiral, I believe we have 2 choices. We can continue attempting to expand through conquest and gradually discover that every species in the galaxy has been prepared to resist us effectively. Or we can accept the invitation that was implicit in the Earth encounter." "What invitation?" "To learn what they've been trying to teach us, to discover what lies beyond conquest as a model for civilization growth, to evolve." The word hung in the air like a challenge to everything the Draconian Empire represented. Evolution implied change, adaptation, and the abandonment of methods that had defined their species for thousands of years. High Admiral rose from his command chair, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. "Are you suggesting that we abandon everything that has made us the dominant force in this galaxy?" "Sir, I'm suggesting that dominance achieved through conquest is no longer sustainable. The galaxy has evolved beyond our ability to control it through force. We can either evolve with it or be left behind. And if we choose this, evolution, what guarantee do we have that it won't simply be another form of conquest, that these teachers won't simply replace military domination with ideological domination?" Admiral had wrestled with this question throughout the long journey back to Draconis Prime. The evidence suggests that the Eternal Collective is genuinely interested in fostering independent development rather than creating dependencies. The species they've been teaching aren't becoming their servants, they're becoming more fully themselves. "Explain." "The humans we encountered weren't trying to become like the Eternal Collective. They were using the knowledge they'd been given to become more human, more creative, more adaptable, more resilient, but still fundamentally human. The teaching seems designed to enhance existing capabilities rather than replace them with foreign ones." High Admiral moved to the great window that looked out over the capital city of Draconis Prime. Below them, the metropolitan center of galactic conquest stretched to the horizon, filled with the monuments and institutions of an empire built on military excellence. "If we accept this path," he said quietly, "what happens to all of this? What happens to the civilization we've built?" I believe it becomes something greater, sir. The infrastructure we've created, the organizational capabilities we've developed, the logistical networks we've established, all of that could serve purposes beyond conquest, but only if we're willing to learn what those purposes might be. For long minutes, the chamber remained silent except for the soft sounds of breathing and the distant hum of the city below. When High Admiral finally spoke, his words carried the weight of historical transformation. Very well, Admiral. You will return to Earth as our ambassador to these teachers. Your mission will be to determine what they're offering and whether it represents an acceptable path forward for our people. And if I determine that it does, then you will learn what they have to teach, and you will teach it to us. The Draconian Empire has survived for 3 by adapting to challenges that threatened our existence. This may simply be the next adaptation we must make. As Admiral departed the Imperial Council chambers, he carried with him the weight of a decision that would reshape galactic civilization. Behind him, the leadership of the most powerful military force in known space began the process of imagining what their empire might become if it chose evolution over conquest. Throughout the galaxy, species that had lived in fear of draconian expansion for countless generations watched and waited as the first signs of that transformation became visible. The great predators were learning to become something else, and the galaxy itself was evolving into something unprecedented. The age of conquest was ending. The age of transcendence had begun. In the depths of space, the installations of the Eternal Collective hummed with quiet satisfaction as another student species took its first steps toward graduation. Earth had been their greatest success, but the Draconians would prove to be their greatest challenge. And their greatest triumph.